So good evening to everyone. I thank you all for participating. We are gathered here for what we call a pre-Yizkor Shevii Shel Pesach Drasha or Drasha. So before we talk a little bit about what we're going to try to do here tonight, we're going to thank those who are kind enough to sponsor this event by supporting the shul, which is indeed a mitzvah and indeed something appropriate when we talk about Yizkor. So I would first want to thank Morty and Pat Gelber, who are sponsoring our meeting here tonight and our learning here tonight to commemorate the yahrzeit of Morty's father, Yitzchak ben Mordechai Zichrono Livracha. So thank you, Morty, and thank you, Pat. Neshama should have an aliyah. Also I would like to thank Louis and Susan Hochman. It's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Louis's father, Eliezer ben Baruch Nachman, Zichrono Livracha, yahrzeit's tonight. Thank you, Louis and Susan. Neshama should have an aliyah. Thank you also to Tzila Kahane, who's sponsoring to commemorate the yahrzeit of Natan ben Yisrael, Yitzchak Rachmiel. Natan ben Yisrael Yitzchak Rachmiel HaKohen, Zichrono Livracha. So thank you so much. Neshama should have an aliyah. So what exactly are we doing here? What are we trying to achieve? So if this is a little bit of a pre-Yizkor, due to the fact that many of us are not able to make it to shul during this period of time, what is Yizkor about? Right? What's that Yizkor? It's very important, very traditional, but what's really the roots? What's the core idea of Yizkor? So what it's really about is the fact that there's a very special Torah reading on the last day of Pesach and on the second day of Shavuos and on Shmini Atzeres. And the last verse of the Torah reading of that day is the last verse in Parashat Re'eh, which is in the book of Dvarim, where the Almighty tells us that, listen, when you make your way to Jerusalem to be inspired, to connect to your roots, Velo yira'eh et panai rekam, be sure not to appear before God empty-handed. How do you appear before God? Ish kematnat yadom, every person according to what he or she can give. Kebirkat Hashem Elokecha, according to the blessing that Hashem, your God, gave you. Ish kematnat yado. So what we derive from here is the idea that Judaism talks about giving. You give. You see others who are in need, you go ahead and you provide. So when we read that verse, we remember, wait a second, we cannot perhaps nowadays make our way to a Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. We're not able to do so, but we're able to give. And if we give, right, we are doing an act that obviously is very beneficial. We do something that is good for us, for our true essence, for our soul. Now, our tradition also teaches us that souls that are no longer here are connected to us, right? I think we all agree, we feel deep connections to those who are no longer here, and those emotional connections indicate that there's something more there. There's a spiritual connection. And therefore, if it is good for my soul to give, it is also beneficial for that soul that is connected to me. And while taking care of my own spiritual needs is an ongoing experience, to go ahead and to provide something for that soul that is no longer alive seems to be something far more challenging. They're no longer in the physical world. So therefore, this pasuk has inspired us throughout the ages, to give, to be concerned about those who are in need. So we make a declaration that, you know what, I read this verse, I'm going to give. But as I give, I don't want the credit just to be mine. I want the credit to be for that neshama that is no longer here. I want to still give to my parent that is no longer here, or to my grandparent, or to the Kedoshim, or perhaps to the martyrs, or perhaps to the holy soldiers who are protecting the Jewish state. I want to go ahead and give those neshamos. So I'm going to give tzedakah. I'm going to go ahead and ish kematnat yado, based on the blessing that was given to me. I'm going to turn around and give, and it will be, yes, for the benefit of a neshama. So what Yizkor is about, it's less than just remembering. It's not just a remembrance, but rather it's an act, it's a commitment to an act that benefits an entity that lives on. That's really fundamental for us, right? The neshama lives on. We could do something for that neshama. So that's why we commit to give as we read that verse. And I would suggest to those who are going to be at home doing the very important mitzvah of taking care of their health, that you read the section we're going to read in Shul, or at least the last few verses. And when you read the fact that the Almighty wants us to give according to what He has given us, commit to give. You commit to give. And that's how you achieve a Yizkor. Yes, there's an Er Neshama, and yes, there's a prayer, and yes, there are a few moments that we reflect on those that had a very significant influence on us. No question about that. But it's about giving. And by the way, giving is not just financially. Right? Excuse me 1 second. Giving is not just financially, we all know, right? Giving, there are those that perhaps much more than needing something financially, there's something emotionally. Their emotions need something. An encouraging word, support, concern. That's a giving that plays a role as well. And that too, by the way, could be for the neshama of someone that is no longer here. So that's what Yizkor is about. And briefly, I'd like to share with you a story that occurred on the last day of Pesach 28 years ago, 1993. And I was at the time davening here in the city of Toronto, south of Lawrence, at a specific minyan. And in my family, there's a minhag, was my father's minhag, that Yizkor is not said during the first year. Okay, the majority of authorities don't follow this practice, but there is a minority that does. I remember it was my father's minhag not to say Yizkor the first year. So therefore, on Pesach, 8th day Pesach of 1993, it was the first Yizkor after my father's passing. So comes Yizkor time, I walked out. And I felt this level of discomfort of walking out of Yizkor, and perhaps there are others around me that knew about the fact that I was saying Kaddish, but perhaps were not familiar with my personal custom. So I remember turning around, and I turned to someone that lives here in Toronto, a very special person. And I turned to him and I told him, by the way, just you should know that the reason I'm walking out is we have that very particular minhag. I don't remember what he responded, but this fellow's name is Benny, a very nice person, smiled. He gave an encouraging smile. I remember it 28 years later. And that was his matnat yado. That was a giving. In other words, he gave a level of emotional support to someone that had a little bit of a moment of challenge, of difficulty. Ish kimatnat yado. So that's the journey of Judaism, right? We are here to give. We are connected to those who are not here because souls live on, neshamas live on. So that's what Yizkor is about. It's very, very fundamental. So what we're going to do here tonight is not going to be a full Yizkor, although we'll read a little bit of one section of the Yizkor, but rather a reminder of the importance of what Yizkor is really about, thinking of others, benefiting a neshama, and a few words of Torah, because if we're gathered here together, right, it's really an opportunity to learn something. So there are a few thoughts I would like to share with you. So that's what we're going to try to achieve as we are gathered here tonight. My first rabbinic position started some 24 years ago in Buffalo, New York, in the Young Israel of Greater Buffalo. And I've shared over the years many stories, a magnificent community, very special people. And we had quite often at the Young Israel, and I'm sure it's still occurring nowadays, guests for Shabbos in the community. It was across the street of a Residence Inn by Marriott, a nice hotel. There were several hotels in the area next to the university campus. So people who were seeking or searching for a little getaway would often choose the closest shul to Niagara Falls, right? That's what they would do at the time. And this Residence Inn was popular because it had a kitchen and it had a self-cleaning oven, people with kosher, fine. So one Erev Shabbat, walking into shul, I noticed someone sitting on the back row. I go over to him, and I don't know if he introduced himself or if I identified him. It was a good Jew from the city of Toronto. His name is Rabbi Shmuel Klein. Rabbi Klein. Rabbi Klein taught here in Eitz Chaim for many, many years. An excellent teacher, an excellent individual, very inspiring person, very wise. One of those people you could say, Chaval, Toronto lost him, that he moved on to the New York area. But after schmoozing with him for a few seconds, I realized he knew me, he knew Miriam very well. He taught Miriam, he learned under my father in Ner Yisrael. So we had a nice conversation with Rabbi Klein. And then at some point I said to him, listen here, you're here. Would you be able to say a few words, Shalashudas? And he said, sure. And after offering it to him, I started thinking through it. Is this a smart idea here? I mean, there are very special people at the Young Israel of Buffalo, but how are they going to take a Hasidic Yid, right, with the payas and a nice hat? How is that going to work? I wondered. I was a touch nervous for 24 hours. Come Shalashudas. And Rabbi Klein spoke, and the crowd loved it. He was excellent. He was in tune. He knew exactly what to say, what not to say, and how to say it. Very, very inspiring. So it became the norm. And he would show up once every 6 months, once a year, and the place was very excited. We wanted him even to speak to the whole congregation. When Rabbi Klein would come to the Young Israel of Buffalo, it was exciting. So let me share with you a Dvar Torah I heard from Rabbi Klein at Shalashudas at one of his visits to the Young Israel of Buffalo. He shared with us a Dvar Torah from the Sfas Emes. Sfas Emes. You've heard of the Ger Chassidim. It's a massive Hasidic movement that does some incredible things throughout the Jewish world. I think there's a Ger Shtibel here in town as well. And the Rebbe who really made it into this massive movement was the author of the Sfas Emes, passed away in 1905. His thoughts, his insights are shared quite often. And Rabbi Klein shared with us the following insight from the Sfas Emes. You know, when you come to shul in the morning, sometimes you will hear a section right before the first long Kaddish. And it starts with the word Rabbi Shmuel Omer. So everyone, I think, is familiar with those three words, Rabbi Shmuel Omer. Now, what did Rabbi Shmuel say? And why is it so important? And why, really, in some ways, we really start our prayers with this Rabbi Shmuel Omer. So this Rabbi Shmuel introduces these 13 rules where you could go ahead and derive the oral tradition. In other words, these are rules that you take verses and words in the Torah, and with these rules, you are able to figure out the oral law. The Yud Gimel Midot She'atorah Nidreshet Bahen. One of them is called Klal Uprat Uklal. Klal, in other words, a general rule. Prat, a very specific detail within that rule. And then again, a general rule. And what the Torah is teaching you is that you could derive information from it if it is similar to the specific. Now, let's clarify it. Let's analyze it or clarify it a little bit. So, for example, the Torah tells us that if you own a farm in the land of Israel, there are gifts you have to give to the Kohen, to the Levi, to the poor. But every 3 years, there is actually a requirement that you take grain or you take whatever goods that the fields produce and bring it to Yerushalayim. So you take a ma'aser, 10%, bring it to Yerushalayim and eat it there. Now, obviously, that becomes a serious challenge if the yield from the field is significant. So the Torah tells us there's a plan B. If you're not able to bring the actual produce, what you do is sell the produce, take the money that gained the status of that sanctified percentage, and spend the money in Jerusalem. Okay, so you have money, it's called money of Ma'aser Sheni, because you separated, for example, the grain, you sold it for $10,000, you transfer it, the sanctity, to money, you carry it to Jerusalem and spend the money there. Beautiful. Now you say to yourself, you have $10,000 to spend in Yerushalayim, can I buy a piece of art? Right? Can I go to one of the nice galleries in the Mamila Mall and purchase some art and take it home and tell everyone, this is my Meiser Sheni? So the Torah tells us, no. There are specifics what you could and cannot do with your money. So the Torah tells us, V'natata ha'kesef. You know what you do with the money in Jerusalem? You should use the money, bechol asher ta'aveh nafshecha, anything you desire. Now, that verse would seem to indicate that if you like art, purchase art. But the problem is the Torah continues after this very general statement, after this klal, a very general statement, this broad allowance, comes another verse, and this verse tells us that you should know you could purchase bakar tzon, you could purchase meat or animals, yain and shechar, and you could purchase wine. So it suddenly limits it, right? The first verse was very, very broad, anything you desire. The second verse comes with this limitation. So which one is it? And to make it more complex, then the Torah tells us, bechol asher tishal nafshecha, anything you want. So what's going on here? You have a very general statement that allows you to use it for anything, a very specific one, meat and wine, and then again, a broad statement. This is called a klal, prat, klal. Okay, so next time you read Rabbi Shmuel's statement, you know what a klal, prat, and klal is. But what the Torah is telling you is the following, that you could derive from it that, yes, the Torah is allowing you more than the specifics sandwiched in between the two general statements, but it has to be similar to the specific. In other words, if the specifics mentioned are things that are fruit and grow from the ground or live off the ground, then you could go ahead and use the money for it in Jerusalem. So you could buy food and you could buy meat and you could be anything that either grows from the ground or it is something that lives off the land like animals. But your art would not be acceptable. So this is the idea. Klal upratu klal en atadan ela ken aprat. You can include other things, but they have to have a similarity to the detail. Similarity being that it's something that is fruit, it's something that lives off the land. So comes this Sfas Emes, and he tells us the following. You know, we are celebrating a Chag now, Chag Pesach. We are in the middle of Pesach, but it's a very interesting holiday, just like Sukkot, because it starts off with the first day, or here in exile 2 days, where there's a whole area of labors that we avoid, right? We don't go ahead and create a new fire. We don't go ahead and turn on our computer. So the first day is very, very broad with its sanctity. The middle days, on the other hand, there are only specific areas in Jewish law that we are told that you don't do it on Chol HaMoed, right? On Chol HaMoed, you don't go ahead and sew a suit. On Chol HaMoed, you don't go ahead and build a house. That's very specific. And then again, on the last days, it has the same sanctity like the first days, that the prohibitions are more broad. The Sfas Emes tells us that the structure of holidays that have a Chol HaMoed, that have these days in the middle, that have some level of sanctity, but not a complete level of sanctity, is similar to a klal uprat uklal. It is similar because the first days, the prohibitions are broad. In the intermediate days, they are limited, and they're broad again. And it is to teach you, and this is the important point, the days of Chol HaMoed are there to teach you how to live the rest of the year. In other words, just as our klal upratu klal regarding, for example, Maaser Sheni was there to tell us that you should analyze those details that are sandwiched in the middle, and that could teach you regarding other things. So to Chol HaMoed are days that if you understand them well and appreciate them, they could teach you how to live the rest of the year. That's what the Sfas Emes, shared by Rabbi Klein, teaches us. Now, if it is indeed here to teach us how to live the rest of the year, I'm going to share a few of my own feelings of what perhaps you could learn from Chol HaMoed. But to do that, I'm going to start with a few halachot, not all of them, because the area and the halachot of Chol HaMoed, I'm probably guilty of not focusing on them enough. In the past, over a year ago, when we had the ability of gathering here in Shul, and between Mincha and Ma'ariv, we would talk words of halacha. I would perhaps at times mention a few of the details that relate halachically to Chol HaMoed, but not enough, clearly not enough. And perhaps come Sukkot, perhaps that's a good idea to start, or perhaps I could get a reminder that it's a good area of Jewish law to review. But now we'll give a few details, some details regarding Chol HaMoed, and the goal of sharing these details is to use this teaching of the Sfas Emes. When you appreciate what these days are about, you can get some guidance how to live the rest of the year. So number one, what is permissible on Chol HaMoed, although, right, as mentioned, I'm not going to sew a new garment, I'm not going to build a house. What is permissible in most situations is identified in Jewish law as Tzorech HaMoed, something you need on Chol HaMoed. If you need it, purchase it. If you need it, you could go ahead and get a hold of it. Tzorech HaMoed. Okay, so that's rule number one we're going to focus on. Rule number two we're going to focus on is something called Davar HaAved. Although commerce is not something that is just simply permissible on Chol HaMoed, there are guidelines what you are allowed and not allowed to purchase. There are guidelines what you are yes allowed to sell or not. If it is a davar ha'aved, if there's going to be financial loss, it is permissible on Chol HaMoed. So therefore, for example, in the 12th century, the great scholars of France, the Baalei Tosfot, Chol HaMoed Sukkot, would make their way to their vineyards for the wine harvest, because it appears that if you were not present in your vineyard as the harvest begins, you would have nothing left. Your neighbors would take. So therefore, the Tosfos tells us it is permissible to make your way and work like it's any other day on Chol HaMoed Sukkot, because it's the time of the wine harvest. It is a davar ha'aved. And so too, if you would live in Lublin in the 17th century, and you were selling household items, and you would purchase them during the big fair, and often the big fair would arrive in town in the weeks leading to Easter, and at times that would fall on Chol HaMoed. So it was permissible for you to spend the whole day in the marketplace purchasing goods, because if you don't purchase it then, it is a davar ha'aved. And in the 21st century, right, if there happens to be a real good sale somewhere on expensive items, and if you miss it, you miss it, right? If you have such a sale, it would be permissible on Chol HaMoed. It's davar ha'aved. Halacha number three that I'm going to focus on, and again, our goal is to transfer using the idea mentioned by the Sfas Emes, Tzorkei harabim, something that the community needs. There were times that, for example, outside of the city, they would have this drain into the river, that sediment would gather, and if they don't take care of it, the whole sewage system would be overflowed. You needed members of the community to gather in masses to clear it. They would schedule it on Chol HaMoed because perhaps it's not the spirit of Yom Tov, but Tzorchei Harabim, if there's a communal need, that is something you do on Chol HaMoed. So we discussed three halachot, right? Tzorech HaMoed, Davar HaAved, and Tzorchei Harabim. And what I would like to do is perhaps transfer it, utilizing what the Sfas Emes recommends, utilizing it to some guidance how to live our whole life. But I'm going to take these ideas and take them out of the halachic realm and move them into the hashkafic realm. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Tzorech HaMoed. Analyze those words. The need of the time. The need of the time. To have a successful Jewish journey throughout life is to realize that different times create different challenges. But those challenges are opportunities. If we take a challenging time and we use it the right way, right? We realize, yes, there's a challenge here, but I'm going to go ahead and do what Judaism wants me to do during this period of time. If I go ahead and tap into the Tzorech HaMoed, the need of that period of time, that is the Jewish way of living, not just Chol HaMoed, throughout the year. You know, we all could look back to moments when we lost an opportunity. And it plays games, right, with the mind at times. on very minor things. It's something very funny. I look back at myself. And again, this was 28 years ago, 28 years ago. And I'm sharing this with you to show you how absurd the human condition is. Because I'll share with you something that's very absurd about what's happening right here. And if I'm the only one, okay, but perhaps I'm not the only one, because I have a feeling that I'm sharing with you something that we as humans struggle with. This was January of 1993. It was right after my father's Shiva. And I went down for the first time to check out the Kollel in Santiago, Chile. So I was sent down by Mr. Friedberg, and it was less than a week after Shiva. And I think it was an airline by the name of Canadian Air. I don't think it's it was in existence long after that. I come to the airport, and through TikTok tours, I got some kind of upgrade. And the fellow at the desk, after he hands me the boarding pass, mumbles something like, upstairs, go upstairs. I didn't hear exactly what he said, and I wasn't focused. I ignored him, and I went to my gate. And I usually make my way to the airport early. I'm sitting there by the gate, some 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, what exactly did he mean go upstairs, go upstairs? What was he referring to? So I look at the boarding pass, and then I realize that there was access to the lounge. So I jump up and I go to the elevator. I make myself go up to the lounge, and I spend there some 25, 30 minutes to get to my flight. So I remember having charata. I remember the regret that here I wasted 30 minutes sitting as a simple person in an airport instead of being among those chosen to be in a lounge. Now, why is it absurd? Because 28 years later, I could still remember that feeling that I lost an opportunity. I lost an opportunity. Tzorech hamoed. The information that is relevant for our life is to realize that, you know what? Things change. There's always going to be something we didn't predict. You deal with it appropriately. That's a success, right? Look at what we've been going through, right? The human race, the Jewish people, specifically here in Canada, that many of us are disappointed with how our government has been dealing with trying to get this country back on track. It's a challenging time, no question about it. We've lost people, right? I've lost people that were extremely close to me from this awful pandemic. It's been a very difficult time. How do we deal with it, right? If it's anger or an opportunity to settle scores or to go ahead and be harsh using my tongue about others who are not doing a good enough job, that's a failure. A failure. If on the other hand, it becomes an opportunity to realize, you know what, I could give chizuk now to others. I could strengthen myself, right? I could strengthen my faith, focus on what I am about. I could reflect. I could go ahead and give words of encouragement to others, like many, many, many people are doing. Hundreds of thousands throughout the world, millions throughout the world. We are utilizing the uniqueness of the time. Moed is a time. Remember, as a Jew, figure out the tzorech, the need of the time, and do what the time requires. There are times that lectures and lessons that we give ourselves have to be about appreciation, right? When you get back one day to South Florida during the winter, and you could enjoy the beauty of nature, or here in Ontario, it's in a magnificent province, right? And you go ahead and you see the beauty, things up north or east or west. It's a time that the message should be appreciate Hodu Lashem Kitov. But there are times that the tzorech of the moed is acceptance, that it's difficult. I turn to God in prayer, and I do my part in uplifting the spirit and think about the needs of others. Tzorech hamoed, a term that relates to Chol HaMoed. I'm using the Sfas Emes to apply it to my whole life. Number two, it's a halacha. Davar ha'aved al chol hamoed. You could take care of those things that if you don't, there is going to be a financial loss. Davar ha'aved. You know, we all relate to things that are lost, things that we lost, right? You know, there was a fellow in Memphis, Talmid Chacham. He's a lawyer now, and I don't remember his first name, but I know his nickname was Yahoo. Yahoo Skase, the good guy, lived in Memphis. So he shared with me a funny story that when he got married in the mid-90s, one of his close friends gave him an envelope at his wedding, and he opened it, and there were shares in a company he never heard of, some small company that was traded on the NASDAQ, and the name of the company was Yahoo. So the friend thought that it's funny that I found a company, unknown company, no one heard of it, called Yahoo, and I'm going to give shares to my buddy Yahoo. So I said to him, yo, that's incredible. You know how much it went up over the years? I mean, here we are, 14 years later. I mean, that's incredible. So he says to me, well, guess what? When my wife saw it, she said, what are we going to hold on to these shares of this penny stock? Like, what are we going to, what? So she sold it immediately, right? And sometimes we could look back at financial advice that we did not take. And boy, do we have charata, do we have regret? It was a davar ha'aved, there was a loss. There was a loss. I just have, by the way, a new approach to stock picking, which I think has never failed if you follow this mechanism, that anything you hear in shul, Be'ez Hashem, one day will return to shul. And in the beginning, we'll obviously have that awareness to be more careful with talking during shul, during davening. But any stock advice you hear in shul on Shabbos that someone suggests it's a good buy, sell it short. I don't guarantee, but my feeling is you'll make money, because from experience, any stock that was ever bought that you heard from someone in shul who heard it from someone who heard it from someone who already purchased it, it's an inflated stock and you sell short. But obviously, just as you don't turn to rabbis for medical advice, I sure hope you don't turn to rabbis for stock picks. Please don't do that. But anyway, davar ha'aved. Now you tell me if that relates to financial matters. How much more so does it relate to that which is far more valuable than money? And if I look at my life and I realize that if I do not go ahead and do what I need to do today, there's a davar ha'aved, another lesson that relates clearly to life. And number three, tzorchei harabim. Tzorchei harabim, the needs of the masses, the needs of others. And here we'll get back to our Yizkor, right? Very soon I'm going to say a few sections of the Yizkor. It's a moment that we go ahead, and it is perhaps the tendency by many to go ahead and focus on a very lonely moment, right? We remember someone that had an influence, an impact on us. They're no longer here. It's a deep emotion that we really can't express it, because sometimes word cannot express a very, very deep feeling. And you're there alone. And the only way really for us to survive that pain of loneliness is with others, right? You know, I've discussed often with many about how to view this period of time. And we're grateful to the Almighty, and with prayer and optimism, we'll get over it. And I've shared often my thought that what we're going to have to do, not just ourselves and not just the Jewish world, but perhaps even humanity, is to think about how important it is to be with others. how important it is to have some kind of structure, some kind of community where we relate to another person, right? We have tools and abilities nowadays to entertain the mind alone, right? There's plenty of learning we could do during this period of time, plenty of Netflix, plenty of information. It's not a boredom that we're battling here, but there's a loneliness, right? There's not this natural good feeling we have when we go ahead and sit down and for 3 hours, and sometimes we need it, we all need it, relax ourselves. What we deeply need is to connect to other people. And the healthiest way to do it is to realize that I can make a contribution that others cannot. Every single one of us can make that contribution to the klal. Everyone. For some, it's financial. For some, it's spiritual. For some, it's emotional. For some, it's just being there with others. Sarche harabim, the idea of thinking that I am here for the sake of the rabbim. And the rabbim doesn't have to be that I'm having an influence on hundreds of thousands or dozens, but even if I influence another person and I play a role that others cannot, I'm living that life of meaning. And that's what the Torah tells us, ish kematnas yodo. One of the commentators notes that the Torah could have told us, since this is a verse addressing the people, it should have said that every person should be ish kematnat yadecha. In other words, God is, through Moshe, is communicating to the people. But it's not ish kematnat yadecha, but ish kematnat yado, because perhaps there is a reading here that is saying the following. You want to know how to define an ish? An ish is someone of importance, someone that is living a life of meaning, that you could turn to them and they say, you know what, he's having an impact on the world. If they realize that they are here for matnat yado, you define an ish based on matnat yado. The person that is living and thinking, you know what, I'm here to make a contribution to others. And obviously, we talk often about the idea that it is impossible to have a positive effect on others if you don't first take care of yourself, right? Hillel, imena nili mili. This forno on this verse tells us that you should know that the first thing you need to do for tzedakah is take care of your own needs. Don't give everything away. He quotes the rabbinic statement that a person should never be mevazvez yoter mechomesh, that you don't give more than a fifth of your tzedakah. So without getting into the details, the message is a clear one. Start off by taking care of your needs. Physically, health, emotional, fulfillment, finding satisfaction in life. But then after that is taken care of, there has to be a point where I say, okay, how am I making a contribution to others? In what role? Where did God place me in the picture where I can have an influence on others and do good? And it is based on the gifts you were given. Ish kematnat yodo. And if cholamoed, and if these days are here to teach us something, sarchei harabim, think about others. And if we want to go ahead and utilize the true Yizkor, right? The true Yizkor. The true Yizkor is, you know what? I live in this world. I have something called a neshama. Those that had an influence on me are connected to my neshama. And yes, I could do good for their sake. I commit. That is what the Yizkor is all about. It's not a remembrance. It's not a passive remembrance. It is an I commit. I commit to go ahead and make a difference. Financially, that's amazing. That's amazing, right? Emotionally, amazing as well. Being there for others that need me. Ish kematnat yado. That's what Yizkor is about. We have a tradition at Bnei Torah that we say Yizkor, and we remember those that we in this generation must remember. The victims or the ones that were massacred in the Shoah. Not long ago, I was reading up on a specific Nazi sympathizer in southern Lithuania, who it appears was involved in the massacre in a community called Darnuskai or Darsuniskai in South Lithuania, a little bit north of Bialystok. The problem is that he's also a Lithuanian hero. He's a Lithuanian hero because he fought the Russians. So he supported the Nazis and most probably was involved in activities that were taking place in the summer of 1941. But he's a Lithuanian hero. And as a result, the Lithuanian community in South Chicago has a memorial for him. It's been several months since I read it up. I don't remember the exact name. And anyway, in our tradition, it's Shevii Yirakev. In other words, we don't put emphasis on remembering those names. But to think that there's a memorial in Chicago, and as you know, Chicago is a city I have a deep connection to, a memorial in Chicago for a person who very possibly was involved in killing my great-grandfather, who was a rabbi there in that city, Rabbi Moshe Aryeh Malevsky. The older brother's named after him. Moshe Aryeh was shot to death in that community with the assistance of locals in August of 1941, and there's a memorial. So we don't have, and we don't focus on tangible memorials. Our memorial is living on, right? Living on. And that's what the victims, and that's what the Kedoshim of the Shoah want us to do, to live on, live the Jewish life. So obviously, a Yizkor, an appropriate Yizkor, is to remember the martyrs of the Shoah. It's also important that an appropriate Yizkor is to remember the fact that anti-Semitism, unfortunately, is alive. There are victims of terror in Eretz Yisrael and throughout the Jewish world. We remember them as well. And then there's obviously to remember the soldiers of the Israel Defense Force. And before, this is right before, as I'm going to read the brief Yizkor for the Chayalei Tzva Hagana Yisrael. That's what I'm going to read here tonight. I would like to share with you a painful moment that we had up a few weeks ago. That before Pesach, I was going through things in my office here, and I have an area where I have some papers that I haven't looked at for some time. And it's before Pesach, you're cleaning up a little bit, and I pull out a family tree, a detailed family tree from 1995 of Miriam's, my wife's grandmother, her father's mother. Her name was Brana Berkowitz, and there's a large Berkowitz family, and some of them moved to Israel, some of them are in New York. Very fascinating family tree, and someone sat down and put in hours of research because they are all descendants. The great-great-grandfather of my wife's grandmother was someone that merited to have many, many descendants. So I'm reading the family tree, and we're looking through them, and at some point, we identify that there's one branch of the family that landed up in Petach Tikva, and they changed the name from Berkowitz to Barak. Barak, okay? And then I read that the Barak family, a very well respected, he's a Weizmann graduate, and she has a whole list of credentials. They had a family with Kanainar, I think 10 children. And it mentioned there that the oldest Barak child, his name is Yehuda Yair. Fine, so it struck us a little bit. It's the name of our grandchild. So after reading the family tree, I said, you know what? In this day and age, you're always curious. It's basically something like a fifth cousin or fourth or fifth cousin. But I'm just curious to see. This is from 1995. It would be interesting to see what these people are up to today. So we're sitting there, and I type in the first name. And again, when you go through a family tree, that starts off from the 1800s, the 19th century. As you could imagine, most of the branches are chopped off by the Germans and the Nazis. That's a reality in all of our families, right? That we all know that there were branches that were simply chopped off. So you can envision a tree, a magnificent tree. And then you could have them branched out into 10, and the 10 are branched out into another 10. So it's hundreds of branches where 90 of them are chopped. And then you have to analyze and be grateful for the 10% that created its own life. And we all have that responsibility. We all have that responsibility to live for those branches that were chopped off. Tragic, right? So I decided to go ahead and look up online. We decided to sit down and look at least for one name of someone that is alive in Eretz Yisrael, the Barak family of Petach Tikva. That was the first family and the first name that I typed in to search about the the survivors of this very large family that, yes, lost perhaps 80%. I don't remember the numbers. So I type in a name, Yehuda Yair Barak, to find the first family member from a family tree. And as I type it in and I get the result, I go Gewalt. Because this Yehuda Yair Barak, who's the oldest of this very special family, was killed in Lebanon. In the late 90s. And the reason it was a very painful and overwhelming moment, because this young man, this Kadosh, was a very special person. Obviously, we sat and we read up on him and we watched a few things about him. This very special young man really symbolized the tragedy we live in, that yes, he's from a family of survivors, right? He lived for the many branches that were chopped off. And Nebuch, he has to die from the Chayes, the Rotzchim, the Hezbollah in South Lebanon, who took his wonderful life away. So it was a moment that it indicates the burden that we still carry, right? The pain that we carry. Baruch Hashem, a Jewish state. I think we're all grateful for it. I think we're inspired by what is being done there. No question about it. But there's still a lot of pain. And as good Jews, we have the responsibility now of living and doing, not just for the branches that were chopped off by the Nazis and the Europeans, but we have this responsibility of, yes, remembering and living and doing our tzarchei harabim and fulfilling our obligation to Klal Yisrael by remembering the over 23,000 Chayalei Tzva Hagana L'Israel who died al Kiddush Hashem. So with that, we're going to end tonight where I could read Yizkor Elohim et nishmot Chayalei Tzva Hagana L'Israel shemasru nafsham al Kedushat Hashem ha'am ve'aretz v'naflu mod giborim במלחמת השחרור ובמערכות סיני בתפקידי הגנה וביטחון. ונשארים כלו מאריות גברו בהחלצם לעזרת העם. זכר עקדתם ומעשה גבורתם לא יסופו מאיתנו לעולמים. תהיינה נשמותיהם צרורות בצרור החיים עם נשמות אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, ועם נשמות שאר גיבורי ישראל וקדושיו שבגן עדן. Amen. The Almighty should remember the soul of the fighters of the defense force of the state of Israel. And we remember them today, and we're going to remember them as we say Yizkor. And yes, we're going to do good and think about tzorchei harabim to benefit all those neshamos that did for us. We're here today, and we feel the pride today because of them. And indeed, may their neshamos benefit, and may also the neshamos of our generous sponsors tonight So thank you again to Morty and Pat Gelber, who sponsored to commemorate the yahrzeit of Morty's father, Yitzchak ben Mordechai. Thank you, Louis and Susan Hochman, to commemorate the yahrzeit of Louis's father, Eliezer ben Baruch Nachman, and also Tzila Kahani to commemorate the yahrzeit of Natan ben Yisrael Yitzchak Rachmiel HaKohen. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Mo'adim lesimcha. Good Yom Tiv to all. Thank you.